for better or for worse. Are those girls doing their job, or are they?
Yeah, they're trying to.
Okay. Are they meeting people at the door? Is that what's happening? Yeah. There's 3 handouts, everybody. If make sure you got them. Wait 1 more minute.
Did you see all the lightning and stuff today?
Yeah.
Oh, it was so cool.
You know the weirdest thing? I was telling you how Winnie's being such a scaredy cat.
Yeah.
And she's not at least a bit afraid of thunder.
Really?
We were out there running around and
Yeah. So the whole dog thing, right? They were up at the park, right? They were doing a picnic, and I guess Crystal got back to her van, opened it up. Dog ran and jumped into her van and would not come out. No collar, nothing. And so she called the pound. The pound was closed today. And she's like, oh, great. So they couldn't get the dog out of the van, so they just took it home. And she was up there hanging out. And then, like, when I went to pick her up, the dog, like, we walked in, it got to the house, right? Went into the thing with the dog, the little elevator that they have, dropped down, and she bolts right for the car. Like, went right in there without an issue.
Nice.
It was cool. Really sweet dog.
Raymond, come on in. And we're going to go ahead and get started, you guys, because we have a lot, as always, we have a lot to cover, and I'm always rushing trying to cover it. I want to, in advance, thank our audiovisual crew. We've already had over 350 views on the things that you're posting, so we're reaching a lot of people that way. Makes me really happy. Second thing I wanted to catch up on is in earlier workshops, I talked about, when we've talked about addiction issues, I mentioned 2 books. One's called Beautiful Boy, and it's written by a man named David Schiff, and the other one is called Tweak, and it's written by a man named Nick Schiff. And, you know, I've read probably hundreds of clinical books on addiction, and I felt like I learned more from these than any of those. There's a really powerful connection in this. Briefly, a journalist, divorced with wife, traumatized son got addicted to drugs, went down a really dark path. And Beautiful Boy is an incredibly well-written first-person experience as a dad on what that was like, what he went through, what he tried to do, how it felt, how it seemed. And it was just profound. And then, a couple years later, after his son Nick actually was in recovery and doing very well, his son wrote kind of a companion novel. And if you read them both, you get to see the dad's perspective on everything that he watched his son go through, and you get to see the son, the addict's perspective on what all that was like. So if any of you have people who struggled with addiction, are really trying to understand it, these are amazing, and I would rather see someone read these than a full clinical expertise on addiction, because I think you actually will learn more from these firsthand accounts and the way that they mirror each other. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about stress and anxiety and how to manage them. How many of you would say that you have struggled with stress or anxiety at some point in your life? Probably everybody. I'm also going to push a book on this one. This is my favorite book for clients. It's called The Anxiety and Phobia Workshop, and it's by Edmund Bourne. It's got a lot of really common sense descriptive stuff about anxiety and its connections, and it has worksheets and things in it, so it's a really nice book to go along, especially along with treatment, okay? With that said, we're going to talk about stress and anxiety. I want to comment that this model that I've designed, which you'll have trouble seeing, I know We're going to start doing PowerPoint, I think. I talked to Rachel tonight, but this model is not done. This is one I'm still really struggling with, some fine points. It's a very complex issue, but some of the things in my model that I think are really important that you don't find in others, I want to go over and we'll talk about. I'm going to start with a definition. One of the most important part of this maybe is what some people call calm, being able to be calm, that moment in your life when you can feel calm. I call it intentional peace, and I want to talk about why I make that distinction. Calmness is a sense of safety, a sense of confidence, a sense of rightness with what's going on with you, and most of you know that sort of peaceful feeling. I don't think calmness comes naturally to humans. I think we have to work at it, and that's why, especially in a world like ours, we live in a chaotic, often unsafe world, and if you don't work at being able to feel peaceful and calm, I don't think you're going to. So for me, it's about intentional peace. That we do have that all on a handout back there too, Pastor. Okay. Oh, good. Oh, okay. So stress is the next thing we look at. We go from being calm to being stressed, right? And stress is a heightened sense of awareness, concern, or focus on something that challenges the mind in either positive or negative ways. We're going to talk a little bit about the fact that stress and even anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing in certain ways. They are part of why we perform, why we get things done on time, why we meet deadlines, why we go to work, make the money to make sure we have food in the house. A lot of that is driven to some extent by stress and anxiety. So I divide stress and anxiety into functional stress and functional anxiety, and needless stress and needless anxiety. And that's when we've let it go past being functional, and now it starts becoming problematic. All right? Anxiety, and a lot of people don't understand the difference between anxiety and panic, so I want to make sure we're clear on that. Anxiety is a state of mind. We get anxious, and what we're experiencing is a mental phenomenon and an emotional phenomenon. We're worrying about something, we're feeling anxious about something, it's affecting our mind. It might start affecting our behavior to some extent, but it's primarily affecting our mind. Panic is when the body comes in. Okay, so the difference between anxiety and panic is anxiety is an emotionally and mentally based phenomenon. Panic is an emotional, mental, and physical based phenomenon. In between the two, something that most people don't think about is called perseveration. And perseveration, I call it rat in the wheel to people to try to explain. If you ever got in that place where you get anxious and worried enough about something that you start just cycling and cycling and circling and maybe even circling like this, and you can't get out, keeps you from sleeping, it starts decreasing your function, that's perseveration. And there's reasons all of these are important. You need to be able to define them in order to be able to know them and to be able to aware of them, because the real secret to helping yourself with stress and anxiety is about awareness. Okay, that's the fundamental piece. You can't do anything about stress and anxiety unless you can become aware of them, know when they're happening, and take steps to prevent it. Some of the reason that's really important is because of what we're going to talk about with the fight or flight response, because they can reach a point where you no longer have any control over them, and then you're in trouble. The same thing is some of the other destinations for stress and anxiety and panic is obsessive compulsive disorder, panic attack disorder, phobias. Those are all sort of towards the end of that road. All right. Any questions on the panic? I'll give you one other piece about panic, which is the reason it becomes physical is because of adrenaline and dopamine. And so I want to just briefly talk about them. They're both chemicals in your body. Adrenaline is a hormone and a neurotransmitter, so it actually plays this dual critical role. And I don't know how much you know about hormones, but they're tiny, tiny amounts in our body, and yet they're probably the most powerful chemical in our body. Adrenaline, works in at about 900 picograms per liter in the human body. That means less than a gram. And a gram's a tiny amount to start with. A picogram is 1,000th of a gram. And yet that stuff can give you a heart attack. Okay? So when you do things that cause adrenaline rushes, you are profoundly making these significant changes in your body, which can be good if there's a real reason for the adrenaline, but it can be bad if there is not. And it can lead to severe medical issues, health issues, and super emotional destructive stuff, including suicidality. Okay. Dopamine, there's a lot of work happening now. It's another neurotransmitter, and it's the feel-good transmitter, right? It's the one that when you taste that little bite of homemade ice cream, you get that, just that sort of pleasure thing going on. Food is my addiction, so of course I go there for an example. It can be one really powerful one is video games. There's a lot of research happening about how for some reason video games tend to really trigger the dopamine response, which is a pleasure response. But dopamine also can be really bad for you in two ways. The first is it's part of what goes to the part of the brain that deals with fear. We call it the amygdala. You don't need to remember that part. But there's a certain part of your brain that fear resides in, and we don't have a lot of rational control over it. We talked about this in an earlier workshop too. Fear is something that's very primitive, and it will come if your body and your brain senses that you are at some kind of risk, and you can't control it. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyways. Being brave is not about somehow being able to control your fear. It is about being able to control the choices that you make when you're afraid. But they're very separate things. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Dopamine does that, but the other issue, and one of the points about the video game thing, is that you can engage in your pleasure stuff too much. This is where drugs and alcohol get impacted also. And you get dopamine exhaustion. Like you're constantly triggering that dopamine reaction if you're doing those kinds of things for extended periods of time. And if you do it for too much, your body can't keep up with it. And when you have dopamine reaction, you essentially no longer have enough dopamine, which is critical to feeling good, excuse me, feeling happy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a place where it then starts triggering the vigilance and threat response, because that's the part of the amygdala that dopamine works in. So I'm going to go over this a little bit more shortly. But keep in mind those two hormones and understand how incredibly powerful they are in your body. Tiny, tiny amounts can wreck you. If they're too high or too, that's another issue about hormones. You have sometimes almost the same symptoms if they're too high and if they're too low. Thyroid hormones, insulin, serotonin, adrenaline, really high levels of those can make you feel anxious, irritable, panicky, weak, clouded thinking, et cetera, et cetera. And guess what? You can have exactly the same things if they're reversed. So too high or too low, you can ultimately end up with the same symptoms. And in my belief, our medical system doesn't adequately monitor those things in the human body. Most of my patients have to fight their doctor when I say, you need to go get your thyroid checked, or you need to go have certain kinds of hormone tests, because it seems to me like some of your issues are hormonal. And then come to find out they're too low or too high, and it's a big part of why they're having a problem. Insulin, because of diabetes, is the only one that they typically monitor on any regular basis. Fight or flight syndrome, we're going to spend some time on that. That's this thing here. This is our survival mechanism. If we get pushed into a situation where we think we are really in danger or at risk, we get huge adrenaline surges, and we're going to talk a little more about it. And if we're really at risk, that's a miracle. That's an amazing God-given thing that you have that adrenaline rush, because you've heard stories about moms lifting the cars off their kids or whatever, where you have this almost superhuman ability to run or fight. Okay, and that's the fight or flight syndrome. If you're in a real life-threatening situation, that's wonderful and that's amazing. If your brain is lying to you and convincing you, then you're wrecking yourself. And that's how people end up with panic attacks and obsessive compulsive disorder and some of those diseases. So again, being aware of this fight or flight thing and knowing how it works will help people manage their stress and anxiety, because it's all, as everything about the human body, it's all about a continuum. Okay, questions? Okay. Please stop me and ask if you do. So, the difference between anxiety and panic. We've already mentioned the most primary difference, which is anxiety is primarily emotional and mental. Panic adds the physical part. The other way we have to look at it is, are they real, perceived, or false? All right? And that ties into when we talk about solutions to anxiety and panic, or the growth of those things. Knowing whether they're real, perceived, or false is critical to you being able to heal yourself from those kinds of symptoms. All right? Panic attack, I want to go into just a little bit, some of the symptoms of panic attacks. And how many people, if you feel comfortable raising your hand, how many people would say they think they've had a panic attack in their lifetime? Yeah. Yeah, they're really much more common than most people are aware. So if you've got yourself worked up enough that you start feeling short of breath, you're sweating, you're having peripheral tingling, like numbness or tingling in your extremities and your fingers, your arms, if they get really cold or really hot, there's a reason for that. Dizziness, even passing out. Sense of depersonalization, feeling like not connected with reality, what's going on, kind of that confused feeling that can happen. Chest pain, nausea, a sense of imminent death or damage or potential damage to yourself. Pounding pulse, heart rate, or a couple others we talked about today, but I don't remember what they were. Okay. So let me talk a minute about the reduced blood flow and the tingling and stuff. When your adrenaline goes up high enough, and again, we're going to talk about that in a second, but when that happens, your body does a cavalcade of things. The first thing to understand is, well, let's talk about it right now. When you're looking at this handout here, that's my model, which of course I believe is right, for the fight or flight syndrome. So you have a certain adrenaline level in your body all the time, and that adrenaline is critical to your body functioning normally. Part of its job is to gatekeep things like your heart rate, your pulse, your respirations, your sweat levels, where your blood's flowing, all that kind of stuff. And so we need it to be at this baseline that you see right here all the time. It is very bad for us if it drops below that. There's a way it can drop below that. When we start feeling anxiety or panic and it starts changing from just emotional to include physical, like a lot of people will start, the first thing they notice sometimes is they're just starting to breathe more shallowly and rapidly. Their adrenaline level starts climbing. If it goes long enough, you actually hit a point of no return. A point of no return is when your brain decides, that's it, we're in huge trouble. And it spikes up to a maximum level, your level of adrenaline. When that happens, it galvanizes your body to work. So the good thing is that's when you have a ton of blood flow pumping to your arms and your legs, or whatever part of you needs to be reactive to dealing with the situation. At the same time, it pulls it away from your periphery, like your hands and feet, which is why you can feel the numbness, the tingling, the cold. It also pulls it away from the higher order process parts of the brain, which is why some people have blackouts, red rages where they don't remember what they did, pass out, not necessarily, they just react reflexively, and they're not actually thinking about what they're doing other than getting away. And this is how sometimes people get hurt, either because we do a dumb thing to run away, or we react so strongly that we hurt the person more than we needed to get away. I have a very sad moment in my life where I broke my friend's arm. And it was from this. I was in college, in my dorm, trying to study. My buddies came in and were like, excuse me, come on, let's go do whatever it is they wanted to do. I don't remember anymore. And I'm like, no, I have to study. And so they all jumped on me and didn't realize it, but they pushed my head down into the mattress, and in between the mattress and the railing of the footrest part of it, and I panicked. And I just sort of did this and accidentally caught one of my friend's arms between me and that metal bar coming across the footrest, and I broke his arm. And I mean, I apologized to him forever, and brought him dinner for like 3 weeks from the cafeteria, and did, but it was completely unintentional, but it was just this huge moment. There's another story of me at 7 rescuing my sister from Trinity River. It was a moment that, it was a true miracle for a 7-year-old to be able to get into that water, get her, and save her from it. So, and even thinking back on that, I feel the adrenaline stuff, and I feel some of the shakiness and stuff. So, you've got to understand the power of it. Momentary adrenaline rushes like that are not going to cause you long-term damage. But if it's happening frequently, constantly, if you're causing it, creating it, it can start becoming very damaging. The other issue about the way this works is it gets up to a maximum level, and we're prepped, we're primed for fight or flight. And there's nothing you can do if you let it get past this point of no return, except for ride it out. Okay, and our body is just burning through that adrenaline, using it to get the right body responses and everything we want. And then guess what? We burn it out, and we crash, and we go down below our baseline. How many of you been through something terrifying, scary, panicky, and then when it was over, you felt shaky, weak, tearful, maybe crying, shaking, dizzy? You feel. You have this other whole reaction, which is your body not having enough adrenaline to keep you at your baseline. So this is, in a way, meant to save our lives, but ultimately is kind of very bad for us in terms of maintaining the stability of our whole chemical system. So people who take anxiety and panic for whatever reasons, a lot of times it's over post-traumatic stress or things like that, and fall into this trap or this cycle over and over, they ultimately end up developing post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, phobias, panic syndromes. So there is a real key to it. And again, and you already caught it if you were listening to what I said, the key is becoming aware that you're doing it. Because when you're working with anxiety or stress, if you become aware of it in this piece here and learn how to stop it and divert yourself, calm down, focus, whatever you need to do, you'll never end up developing it. You are able to prevent it, and you're able to go back to this whole issue about intentional peace. Okay, so that, to me, that's a really critical issue, of course, as a therapist. Usually by the time someone comes into my office, we have to do damage control first and then help them learn how to undo. Because like everything else about humans, this becomes very habitual. People develop habits around anxiety and panic and worry. And they actually can addict to it even. Between the dopamine response and the adrenaline response, this can be very addicting. How many of you have ever been the 11th hour person? Wait till the last minute and then finally, get freaked out and rush around and do it. Some of that may be procrastination and other things going on, but some of that can be And I'll admit again, in college, I liked that rush. Night before, I got a 40-page paper due tomorrow. Cool, I'm ready. Let's do it. And I was always shocked at the incredible. I mean, my mind was super clear. I had incredible energy to do it. I was able to push through, feel really good about it. But then at some point, I recognized that I was actually becoming addicted to it. And then I have all of the other things about it that I have to worry about. In addition, when you have this the dopamine thing that's happening right in here, where you have your issues about hypervigilance and threat response, that further accentuates the possibility of it becoming an addictive process. So when we do recovery in action, I think Fathers is next week and recovery is the week after that. I want to spend a little bit of time with whoever comes to that group and talk about that dopamine connection, because it's very pertinent to that issue too. All right? Any questions about that? Yes.
It's not really a question, but one of the things that I learned years ago was the different exercises that we can help teach kids to help get them out of that fight or flight. And I didn't know this part of it, but I knew how it would affect children. And if you can teach them how early that when they start feeling that, the adrenaline levels going up, then it's just getting their whole body working together.
Right. And you have to recognize that you have this limited time frame to do that. This is an issue where I think Joey is super good with the kids at school, because he knows how to divert them, calm them down, refocus them, give them a different perspective. And lo and behold, all that stuff's going to be on our list when we talk about interventions. But children are more resilient than adults in some ways, but they're more subject too, because they can be more terrified by an incident than an adult sometimes because of their lack of worldly knowledge. One of the biggest rushes of kids with anxiety disorders I had come to my office was after the release of the movie Pet Sematary. Now, I don't know what you think about Stephen King, besides for I think he needs therapy. Because no mind can be that warped and somehow not need to talk to a therapist. But if you study his work, which is one of the things that we did in college, there's a secret to what he does, and kids are particularly vulnerable to it. If you read his books or look at his movies, he took everyday items like pets and brothers, and cats and dogs, and he turned them into, and wash machines, I think in one of them even, he turned them into something terrifying. Now, most adults are able to be like, okay, yeah, I see that. But for kids, that movie Pet Sematary probably put over 30 kids in my office with anxiety problems. So, first question is, why are parents letting their kid watch that movie at 6 or 7 years old? But I got to deal with, and it was part of, I mean, that rush was one of the things that made me start developing all of this stuff 25 years ago or whatever that was. But kids in that way can be more vulnerable because of their naivete and their lack of experience. Even though they can be more resilient and bounce back from something, they also can more easily fall victim to it turning into a true anxiety or panic attack. Even, we're going to talk about secrets a little bit too, and I'll give you another example, and it does have a little colorful piece, but bear with that, please. 9-year-old girl brought to my office, star student, great kid, no problems, everything great, wonderful life, mom and dad, both really good with her, and for some reason over a several week-long period, she had developed a terrible anxiety disorder to the point where she couldn't hardly go to school. And out of desperation, mom brings this little girl into my office. And I talk with her and spend some time with her, and I find out what happened. And I call mom back in, and I'm like, well, mom, I hate to tell you this, but you're the reason that she has this. And she said, oh my God, what am I doing? And I'm like, you're lying to her. And she goes, what are you talking about? And I go, I'm talking about the conflict between you and your husband. Her and dad were having these frequent arguments later at night in their bedroom, but loud enough that this girl was hearing these arguments. She couldn't really hear all the content of them, which was a good thing, but she knew there were troubles. And so she went to her mom several times and said, Mom, what's wrong with you and Dad? And, oh, no, we're fine, honey, nothing to worry about. Are you going to get a divorce? No, no, we're good. I don't know what you think you're hearing. It's not. She's smarter than that. And I'll tell you what, there's no one in your life that's a better barometer for your emotions and truthfulness than your kids. So you can't lie to them. And I said, you need to tell her the truth. Well, what they were arguing about for weeks was Dad wanted to do some experiments in the bedroom that she wasn't down with. And it turned into this several-week argument. So the mom, in a fit of anger, when I said, you need to tell your daughter that, she goes, fine. You want me to go tell my daughter that her dad is a sexual pervert? And I'm like, no, of course not. No, of course not. You need to tell her age-appropriate information. Dad and Mom are having some arguments, but we're fine and we're going to be okay. But when you try to deny the truth and keep the secret, your daughter's mind takes that to the nth degree and thinks that her world must be ending. So the same thing is true even for us as people. Secrets are one of the most negatively powerful ways that we develop anxiety and panic. And it is critical that you don't hold secrets. You don't have to tell the whole world, but you need to tell someone. It can be your pastor. It can be a therapist. It can be your spouse. It can be a friend. And there's a profound and amazing transformation once you have said whatever that is out loud to another person. And a ton of the pressure and anxiety and paranoia that gets created by trying to keep the secret goes away. And most of the time, the other person is like, yeah, that's not as big as you think it is. And then you get, and we're going to talk about perspective and relativity and all that stuff too, because then you get this second view and you're like, oh, wow, I guess I kind of went way overboard on that. And this thing that had been making you miserable, there's two reasons that secrets are so bad. The first is it makes you miserable. You're keeping a secret. You're living a double life almost. You're not telling people you love and care about important things or whatever. The other issue is, guess what? It's a 24/7 job to keep a secret. You go around all the time being careful, consciously or unconsciously, about not saying or doing something that's going to reveal your secret. And so the negative power of secrets is something that is so undervalued in American society that one of my missions has been to convince people. And of course, as a therapist, I'm, sort of the perfect person. That here's your confessional. You don't have to worry about it going anywhere. But you hopefully can do that within your own family too. So it becomes a really critical thing. So we'll come back to more about that. OCD and phobia connection, again, into the road stuff. This is where it can go, and one of the reasons it's really important. Also, again, I do want to stress roller coaster rides. That's an adrenaline rush, right? And because we do it once, and because even though it may scare the bejesus out of us while we're on it, we really do believe we're going to survive, or we wouldn't have gotten on it. But we get the adrenaline rush. We get that same sort of feeling that we have if we're really in danger. And it's great. But we do it for one day at the park, and then we're done. And that's different than putting yourself in a state where you're constantly spiking and triggering these two powerful chemicals in your body. Does that make sense? Okay, so even scary movies or jumping off the diving board or whatever, we get little tastes of this and we like it. But again, if you have some addictive parts of your nature, you even have to monitor that. I've worked with people who became addicted to danger, skydiving or whatever, to the point where they were starting to have these symptoms as though they had a really negative kind of reason for their epinephrine, adrenaline stuff going crazy. Okay, I worked with a young lady who was repeatedly this sounds weird, but she was repeatedly hospitalized because she wouldn't stop running. Okay, this was in college. I was responsible for 600 kids in a dorm, and she was one of my kids. This was before I was even a therapist. And she became very anemic. She became emaciated. She became unhealthy, and yet she would go out and run for like 5 hours every day. And the doctor kept begging her to. She had to take a break. She had to stop, or at least cut it down to 20 minutes a day for a while. Let her body recuperate. And she was so addicted to the rush of what she was doing that she couldn't stop. We put her in treatment for running because she almost died in some of her later hospitalizations because her body had become so diminished and destroyed by an addiction. So keep in mind that in a way, some of that stuff can feel really good, but it also can be very sinister and subtle and sneak up on you and you not even realize that's where it's going. Okay? The fight or flight response paradigm, I want everyone to understand there's there's a lot of important parts about it, but understand you need to be at the baseline, most of your life. You need to understand that when your adrenaline starts running, you need to become aware of it. And then you can use interventions to stop it from hitting this point of no return. This is your window of opportunity right here, where you want to be able to go, wait, I'm starting to get stressed out. I'm starting to get anxious. I'm starting to worry. I'm starting to feel panicky. I need to stop right now, and I need to refocus and stop that escalation in its tracks, all right? And we're going to talk about some of the ways to do that. The other issue, and again, I know you probably can't see some of the writing on here, but look at your handout while I go over this. I've come, and I haven't seen this anywhere else in the research yet, so I think this is also a really novel concept, but I've come to believe in it strongly. One of the things people need to understand about anxiety and panic and the role it can play is that it can go two different directions, and that's one of the reasons people don't notice it sometimes. One direction it goes results in decreasing hope and energy and ultimately personal implosion, and I'll talk about what that means. But the other way it can go is increasing fear and increasing negative energy. All right, so when you are struggling with things like anxiety and panic, you have to challenge yourself a little bit about which direction am I going. I want to be here in this center part. I want to be at intentional peace and calm. But if I'm veering off of that, am I going this way, or am I starting to spiral down? So let's go over kind of each of the steps that I think happens. When we move away from calm and intentional peace, we go to functional stress on either side of that. Okay, and again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Stress can actually motivate us, give us a boost of energy, help us get really focused on accomplishing our task or whatever. That also then can go to functional worry, although I think that's just a minute amount of time, and then it becomes either an anxious worry or a needless worry, whichever phrase you want to use. Where in one way, sometimes you're worrying about something you don't have any power to change. The serenity prayer, for those that know that. And that's one of the things that you want to recognize, because that's a form of needless worry. Another needless worry is when it's not functional, not necessary. You're starting to worry about something that isn't going to be a risk to you. I tell a story about the 11th hour man rushing to work at the last minute, realize I got to go to the post office first, so I'm on my way to the post office, and I'm in a little bit of a rush, and I get behind Mr. Brown, the old DMV instructor, for any of you that maybe remember Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown and love the man dearly, but Mr. Brown is doing 15 miles an hour through town. And I got to get all the way through town and get to the post office so I can hightail it to Reading to not be late for my appointment. So I did some good perspective shifting, like you just got to get up to the street to turn down, and then he'll keep on going home and you'll be able to turn. We get to the street to turn to the post office. Mr. Brown decides he has mail to deliver too, so he turns. And at that point, I'm like saying not nice things about Mr. Brown. I'm stressing out. I'm like, I'm going to be late to work. And finally catch myself and like, wait a minute. And this is for me, one of my most profound calming tools. I say, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Now, my patients have taught me I need to say realistically, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because I've gotten some doozy answers about what's the worst thing that could happen, including nuclear bombs and the end of the world. So realistically, what's the worst thing that can happen? I'm like, I'll be 10 minutes late and I'll have to apologize to my first patient. I think we'll all survive. And all of a sudden that's all gone because I was needlessly creating actually kind of an irrational anxiety because it really wasn't going to somehow end up in a bad place. Does that make sense? Okay. But I was, on this side of it, I was working myself up and providing all this negative energy to the growth of anxiety and leading myself towards panic. Joey, you want to talk about coming this way? Where you go the avoidant?
Oh, yeah. So, like, when I started feeling stressed out or, like, had a bunch of anxiety, I would avoid everybody. I would kind of hide away. And it's funny because, like, the longer you do that, the harder it is for, you to do that. Like, picking up a phone, right? Most people, it's just a phone. When you get super stressed out or you're full of anxiety, that phone can literally feel like 40 pounds just to pick it up and call somebody. Hiding out was one of the things I did all the time. And some people don't ever give up. So they would show up and make sure I came out. But yeah, and it's a real thing, and it's crazy how it affects your life.
So if we look at this piece of it that Joey's talking about, worry turns into needless worry. Needless worry turns into avoidance. Avoidance turns into a sense of failure, worthlessness, hopelessness. That all comes to depression. And ultimately, this is why I feel like this is implosion. You become non-functional. Like Joey was cuddled up in his room, lights off, pretending he wasn't there, completely non-functioning and hiding from the world. And here, this is a huge danger point. You may not develop a panic attack disorder if this is the direction that your stress and anxiety takes, but you will develop depression. You will develop apathy, which is a lack of caring or feeling about anything. And let me just define something really quickly. Depression is not the absence of emotion. Depression feels like the absence of emotion. What depression really is the repression of emotion. Think of it as a pressure cooker. When you become depressed, you feel like you're numb, you're not. What you've done is you've taken all of that negative emotion, pain, trauma, whatever it is that is depressing you, and you have stuffed it into a pressure cooker and you have put on the lid. Okay, and for those of you that know how a pressure cooker works, there's a little valve on the top called a petcock. Why it has that name, I don't know, but that's its name. And if the pressure builds too much, that thing will come off. And we actually, when I was a kid, we had one explode in the kitchen. It was crazy. It can come off partially, and that's where you might have outbursts of anger, irritability, restlessness, or whatever. But all that emotion is there, but it is killing you from the inside because it is repressed into this tiny little pot inside of you somewhere because you don't want to feel it. Okay, so one of the huge mistakes people make when trying to help themselves or others with depression is they take what it looks like on the surface and try to treat that. That's not what it is. It is not a numbness, a emptiness, a lack of feeling. or a lack of emotion. It only feels like that. It's actually the opposite of all that. It's an overwhelming amount of all of those things, to the point that it's so painful that you push it down inside. The emotional repression. And then this is the purpose, this is the person that oftentimes, because of their anxiety and panic, becomes suicidal. Because it's too much, and that pressure inside is building constantly. And I'm more worried about this person reaching suicidal points than this person that we're going to talk about in a minute. This person can, because they get so sick of and desperate about their anxiety attacks and their panic attacks and the constant attack on their peace and all that, that they can become suicidal that way, but they're actually at less risk than the person who takes their anxiety and stress and goes this way with it. Okay? If we go this way, we start with functional stress, we go to worry, we go to needless worry. My writing's bad, I can't even read it here. And then we start into anxiety, all right? And then we go to perseveration. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Perseveration is when you do that rat in the wheel. Worry, can't stop thinking about something, keeps you up at night, can't get off the topic, come back to it every 5 seconds or whatever. And it just starts becoming your world. And it amplifies all of that anxiety and stress and makes it far worse. We go from there to restlessness, impulsiveness, and freneticism. Joey hates that word. But freneticism is another really important word. Freneticism is, and especially in our kids, it's something to be alert to, useless, non-productive, constant energy output. Like, have you ever seen someone wringing your hands or walking in circles or just sort of running around their house and not accomplishing anything, or pacing or walking? They have this incredible negative energy being created by all their anxiety, and the output from that energetically is called freneticism. So it's a sign that someone's really in trouble. They're already up to this point in this process. Okay? And so frenetic behavior, when you see someone just get, and Joey and I talked today about the connection between that and tweaking. Does everyone know what tweaking is? Tweaking is a part of the syndrome that happens with abuse of amphetamines. If you have someone who's using cocaine or meth or crank or crack or any of those kind of things and similar drugs, they'll take apart their car and leave it in 500 pieces and not know how to put it back together. And they'll think they were doing something good. They'll spend 10 hours cleaning their house and not actually necessarily get anything clean. And it's a drug-induced form of freneticism. So that hopefully will help you kind of remember, because to me this is really critical, especially, like I said, especially when I'm working with kids, because they typically don't start going this way if they have a good supportive home, but they usually end up going that way because then they try to contain their behaviors because they don't want to disappoint their parents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really important thing to look for and watch. Anger, irritability, and decreased rational thinking comes next. You get so caught up. I feel like I call it a blinders on moment, where like you're so caught up in your anxiety and worry that you start not making sense. You start getting farther and farther out there, basically. Another sign. And it's because you're letting the anxiety and worry be like blinders, and you stop seeing all the rational pieces around it. And probably everyone in this room has seen someone where you're like, really? That's how you're reacting to whether your pasta was al dente or not? To where you can see someone like, why are you getting so worked up and crazy about that? Reactive kids with like reactive attachment disorder, trauma issues, this is one of the places that you really see this, where the peanut butter was a little too thick or the crust wasn't cut off, and all of a sudden they're having a crisis and they're having a tantrum and they're sobbing and the world's over and all of that. So and I've seen adults do the same thing. So it can be any of the above. if we get to this place where those blinders come on and we keep going, if we keep escalating this increasing fear and negative energy, that's when we start into OCD, panic, and phobia territory. Okay? And with all of this, we have this second line here, which talks about when we get to this point where we're kind of past the perseveration, we're getting into these other things, that's when we start having adrenaline hits like we talked about before, and when we start having dopamine hits. And those things take us further away from rational thinking, make that anxiety, panic, fear that much worse and that much more realistic, even though it's not. And so there's a place where this is where it becomes physical, and you start losing control of it. And if you lose enough control, that's where you go to panic. You have fight or flight, you have point of no return. And that's why, to me, if this is the pathway that your anxiety and stress takes, that's when you explode. And you can be super self-destructive, you can be a risk to others, either just because you're so angry, got so much energy happening that you're trying to exert, so irrational about the way you're looking at the world at that point, that sometimes you're not safe for yourself, for sure, but you're not necessarily safe for others even. This is where road rage is an example of this, where they literally got so angry at what they perceived as rudeness by another driver that they went into a rage. They had the adrenaline and the dopamine rush, and then it became fight or flight. And now they're ramming the car that passed them, or shooting at them, or whatever. So road rage is the perfect example. A lot of the teen boys that I've worked with over anger and violence issues, they don't even remember the fight. They don't remember beating the pulp out of someone else. But it's because they got to this point where they can get so crazy with it. Does that make sense? How do you guys feel about, because, I mean, now I'm using you as guinea pigs, because like I say, I think this is a novel theory. Does it resonate and feel real about the fact that you can go either up or down with stress and anxiety? Does it make sense with this explanation? Okay, because I think it's right. Okay, so the secret is intentional peace. And intentional peace means that you set out to be a calm and peaceful person, and you work on doing all the things that you need to do to be a calm and negative person. The third handout you have, steps to manage stress and anxiety. I'm going to run through those, and again, these are things we can come back to and talk about more in depth. One of the most critical things is perspective. What's that? 7:24. Okay. Perspective. You know, and again, this is a particular skill set that my son does really well with. He'll take a kid that's blowing up over whether his ball was red or blue and help them gain perspective about, is that really something to be upset about? Why is that something to be upset about? We call it reframing, which is another really important word. Like, well, you're looking at it this way. What if you looked at it like this? And that's something I feel like I can do really well oftentimes with my patients. And they can actually be like, oh, okay. That story I told last time about the wife who wanted the red Ferrari, for those of you that were here or saw that online, that was an example of that. She, in her mind and in her shuttered perspective, she had decided that the only way her husband showed appreciation was by buying her a red Ferrari, when all she actually really wanted was the appreciation. And once I was able to help her reframe that, then all that other stuff went away, and all the pent up negative energy about it went away. So, reality checks. You need to constantly check yourself and be like, am I being realistic? If you're not sure, or even feeling the least bit confused, that's when you start needing to reach out and ask other people. I mean, even as a therapist, I have another therapist friend of mine that I will call her when I get really stumped or really upset with a patient, and I will blah, 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 blah. And she says almost the same thing to me every time, because it's a particular weakness of mine as a therapist. She says, so, It sounds like you're working really hard. And what she means is I'm trying to solve it for my patient. And when even when she says so, I'm like, oh, I know, you're right. You're right. You can't save them all, and they have to want to be saved, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But she'll pull me back from that brink as a therapist. And she's giving me a reality check. She's reframing for me. She's helping me with my perspective, because I can get so caught up in my crusade that I'm going to help this person no matter what, that I can lose sight, even though I've been doing this for 40 years. Negative power of secrets. This is the next thing we talk. Tell your secrets. Tell your secrets to someone you can trust. Even writing them down confidentially for yourself helps some, but you don't get the reality check and the perspective and reframing that you would get if you could tell someone. And if you feel like you don't have a system around you, that there are people that you trust, go to your therapist, go to your pastor, go to someone who can guarantee you that confidentiality, but tell your secrets. Order. How many, when they walk in their house and it's cluttered, dirty, piled up, messed up, feel the stress and anxiety of that and become less productive? Yeah. We don't actually really realize often how important that is. We don't need to, go ahead. We're coming to it. We are. We purposely, just as an aside, we purposely approach these workshops in a secular, worldly fashion because we want people from the community to come too. But we also will be honest and address, and we love it when someone asks, because even with my legal limitations, state of California is very anti-religion. And the laws that govern what therapists can tell patients, they severely limit that. I have to have a patient ask me, and then I can tell them. And like I explained in the very beginning, when this was a germinal seed between Pastor Mark and I said I became a demonstrative Christian. I lived my life in a very public way, and had patients eventually get to where they would ask me, how can you be so confident? How can you be so unaffected by this? How could you get through that? And then I can go, I'm glad you asked. So, skip down to that. Faith, belief, and confidence. They are, at the risk of crossing that line, they are maybe your most profound intervention. If simple faith, especially strong, unfaltering faith, can get you through anything, you won't develop anxiety and panic if you have enough faith. There's truth to that. Now, whether that's to a Christian God and religion, that's a choice that every person gets to make. For me, it is a Christian God that my faith is based on. And very early in my life, I came up with my own mantra, which is biblical, which is, God's not going to give me anything I can't endure. And everything he gives me is meant to make me stronger. And then I have a personal talk with him about it. God, I think you're way overestimating me on this case. But he always eventually shows me that he's not. I made it through. But I've had so many people in my office come to search for their faith, whatever it's going to be, because of that exact scenario. And so for me, that's been an incredibly successful way for me to do my missionary work, which is how I've looked at this whole thing. So there's a lot more to that, and maybe we should do a whole workshop on faith as it is. So going back up, order, having a safe, calm, predictable environment and world. Timeliness. How stressful is it to be running late or almost be running late? Trying to develop a schedule and a time. Schedules are critical to decreasing stress and anxiety. Support systems and team response. Hopefully, all of us in this room have a positive, non-toxic support system. And hopefully we even have people where we can be like, please take this and do this for me or whatever, under the appropriate healthy circumstances. But being able to have a sense of I have a team that would be there for me. When the tree fell on my property, I called my son, who was there 10 minutes later with chainsaw. Freed me from being trapped prisoner in my property by a tree. And that was nice for me. My daughter and son-in-law, same thing. I'm able to call them if there's an issue, and I know that they're going to be there. We're a team, and that team helps my level of confidence and my level of belief that I can make it through whatever is stressing me out or causing anxiety or worry. Being proactive and not procrastinating. Again, how many of us procrastinate? I'll tell you a true story, just a 5-second story. In 1980, when I started college, I know I'm ancient. In 1980, when I started college, and I went to the college library or the bookstore for the first time, and I got all my books for the first semester. I saw this book called Overcoming Procrastination, and I'm like, I need that. And that book is still in my bookcase at my house, and I am going to read it one of these days. That is a true story. It hasn't happened yet, but it's there, and before I die, I'm going to read that book. But procrastination can create huge amounts of stress and anxiety. The body, the physical connection, rest, nutrition, exercise, you guys always hear me stress this, and leisure and socialization, some of the best stress reduction we have is just hanging out with someone that we care about for even an hour or two, okay? I've mentioned before also about a safety period. Our world's unsafe. When we leave our home, we enter a stressful environment, and we're typically in that environment for several hours. And when we come home, we need to be able to unwind, debrief, de-stress, and feel calm, peaceful, and safe. And not all of us live in homes where we go home and we feel calm, peaceful, and safe. There's infighting, there's problems in the marriage, there's stressful kids, whatever, the house is falling down, whatever it is. And what we're doing is we're creating that dopamine threat response, hypervigilance thing that we were talking about. We're creating adrenaline rushes because the instant we walk in the door, instead of relaxing, we're just like, okay, now I get to deal with this. And so it is so vital that you make sure that your home, I mean, there are people who I've had to say, maybe you need to not be with that person if you go home and you're fearful, stressed, and anxious the whole time you're home. Maybe you need to rethink what you're doing. Because without that, you're going to burn out. There's all that stuff we talked about earlier about how you exhaust this hormonal strength that you have that way. That's one of the quickest ways to do it. When 24 hours a day, you're somewhere that you're stressed out by. The karmic breath, I've mentioned this before, again, but it's so important. I teach almost all of my patients to do this, so we're just going to do a brief run through. The karmic breath is meditation, a form of it, and I know that meditation is sometimes a dirty word in religious structures. It's not. It's actually a measurable state of the brain. Our brain exerts different brainwave lengths at different times. And I've been fortunate enough to be trained in this and have equipment in my office where I can hook you up and I can tell you what brainwave states you're exerting. Alpha, for example, is typically an energetic, creative, high-performance brainwave. In fact, most Olympic athletes, most professional athletes actually have alpha wave training as part of their preparation to go to the big game or the big event. Beta is one of the places that can be a lot of worry and anxiety and stress. Delta is when we're in that really calm place. Maybe we're not thinking about anything much, but we're relaxed and we're sort of focused, even if it's on nothing. That's meditation. Theta is what we're hopefully reaching when we're deep asleep and our brain is getting to relax. So it's not magical. It's scientific. And part of the way I treat anxiety and panic sometimes for people is I can hook you up to the machines. You get the readout, just like you would get if you were getting an EEG at the hospital, basically. And I can be like, look, right now you're in alpha waves or you're in beta waves. And then I can talk with him about, let's get you to alpha. So I want you to do the following things to stimulate your brain waves to ramp them up into alpha. Or if I want them to go to theta, where you really learn how to relax, stop stress, stop whatever, you can actually train your brain to go into theta without the machines telling you, because you get used to it. You become aware of what brainwave state you're in. Now, I got all that fancy equipment, but the monks and the meditation people and all that stuff, you learn over practice. Okay, I feel super calm right now. I feel super focused. You don't necessarily put the name theta on it. But learning how to regulate your own brain states is a huge part and a huge chance at a healthy piece of this. Avoiding or reasonable use of stimulants, okay? Caffeine, actually the big argument right now, research has once again circled around to moderate levels of caffeine are healthy for you. There are some things that are never healthy for you, like nicotine, crank, Coke. I hope I don't have to prove that. There are some stimulants that are never healthy. But you can cause this excitation with overusing stimulants. I got called in on a SWAT maneuver in Anderson several years ago because a patient on a dare had taken 9 triple shots of espresso. And he ended up in his garage with a submachine gun, believing that things were coming in to get him. And when the cops got called, he wouldn't talk to anyone but me because he had known me from years before. And so I went in and spent several hours bringing him down because the stimulant had overpowered this whole thing and thrown him into fight or flight response. So I'm not telling people to don't drink coffee, maybe because that's my vice. But I am saying that you need to be reasonable and rational about stimulant use. And some of them, it's never a good thing. It's never healthy. Okay? The karmic breath is a certain way of breathing, and it does several things. It calms you down. It diverts you from whatever you're anxious or worrying about. And it increases carbon dioxide in your blood. Does anyone know why that's important? Okay, do you know that amazing when you know you're going to get a good night's sleep and you're snuggled up in bed and you start feeling really dreamy and comfortable and all is right with the world? That feeling actually is caused by increasing carbon dioxide in your blood. When you yawn, it's caused by increasing carbon dioxide in your blood. So we actually have a natural calming medication in our air available to us all the time. How do you get it into your body? You can yawn like Connor's doing, or you can, just teasing you, Connor, or you can purposely cause it to happen. Here's the deal. Your lungs, you draw air into your lungs, and what does your lungs do? They are busy for the time that air is in your lungs, pulling all the oxygen off, right? And then it feeds that oxygen off into your blood and oxygenates the rest of your body. You exhale the old air, and then you re-inhale, and it starts doing it again. The trick is, if you exhale for longer than you inhale, you cause a strange thing to happen. Those parts of your lungs, the little machines that grab the oxygen, they're just greedy and they're desperate to get every bit of oxygen they can. When they've gotten all the oxygen, if you haven't exhaled yet, carbon dioxide, because it has 2 oxygen molecules attached to it, becomes the next available food for them. So it starts grabbing that carbon dioxide, and you will get a natural calming response for it. So most people, you got to figure it out for yourself, because you don't want to oxygen starve yourself or panic yourself. Your inhale exhale cycle might be 7 seconds. So if it is, you want to breathe in for 3, hold for 1 or 2, breathe out for 5. And if you do that, you've just accomplished multiple things you do to decrease anxiety. And one of them is actually biochemical. You divert your brain, you break your focus on the thing that's making you anxious because you're now having to focus on your breathing, and you increase your carbon dioxide. Now, in that breathing, when you breathe in, you need to make sure that your chest and your stomach both expand. Okay? One of the reasons is we have lower quadrants of our lungs that actually are like way down here when it's fully expanded. One of the issues that happens with that is sometimes, especially if you're not a natural athlete, that lower quadrant starts getting stuck with stale air. And when it's stuck with stale air, your brain doesn't even know why it's getting anxious, but it's feeling oxygen starved. So a lot of times you have this situation where you aren't breathing in deeply and fully, and you're getting this stale air in there, and you're increasing your anxiety because your brain is sending you an alert that you feel oxygen starved, even though it doesn't consciously give you those words. So when you breathe in, you want both to come up. When you breathe out, you want to feel your stomach depressed. You want to feel like you've completely exhaled and completely emptied that lower stomach. I get my patients at night to do this for 3 minutes when they're going to sleep, where they literally practice making sure they're getting a full inhale, holding it for a second, full exhale. And number one, it's like taking a sleeping pill, so it really helps in that respect too. But it's a very powerful way to go. I know we're way over. Okay. Comparing with others, keeping things relative, surrounding with positive people, talking things out, counseling. Know what you're grateful for. Again, a lot of times we go down a rabbit hole because we're super upset that we only won 50 cents or I don't know, whatever it is. And if we stop and really think about everything that we have been gifted in our lives, it reframes, redirects, gives us a different perspective. So know what you're grateful for. Last thing I'm going to mention really quickly, and then I'll be out. There are times when the appropriate thing to do about anxiety and panic is to, for a while, take medications. It's a huge step. They're never good for you, but sometimes it's a lesser evil. And I'll give you 2 examples. The first thing is if you get into such a rut and you're so shuttered, like we talked about before, that you can't break out of it yourself, you may need a break. And you may need and 3 weeks is a max for like anxiety meds, because they're very addictive. They have all this other negative stuff that goes with that. But you may need that to help get you to a point that you stop cycling. The other thing that I'm just super excited about, there's a researcher whose last name is Vanderkolk. He's a pretty famous researcher in this area, and he has come up with a theory that I fully believe. 3 different people can have a car accident that are very similar, and only one of them develops PTSD from it. Why is that? The reason is they do this in the car accident. They have this adrenaline surge. They have the fight or flight response. They crash, but emotionally, they stay frozen up here. And you can tell who these people are because a day later, they're still completely immobile by what they went through. This person that gets stuck in that fight or flight response emotionally needs to go to the emergency room, needs to take anti-anxiety medications for maybe even just a week, but they need to break that. Because if they stay in that for days and weeks, it will turn into post-traumatic stress disorder for them. So just something for you and your loved ones. If you have someone that goes through a horrific incident and they're not calming down over hours or days, remember this, because you can prevent them years of damage and grief by knowing that you're stuck, you need something to break this. And unfortunately, unless you're going to like knock them out, which creates a whole different set of problems for you, medication is sometimes the only effective way, because they're stuck somewhere in that survival mode, and they can't break free. We're supposed to be able to, when we crash, break free from that. It doesn't always happen, and he really believes, and I agree with him from all the PTSD cases I've worked, that for some people they get stuck. Okay, thank you guys. And again, I ran over, sorry, but there's a lot in this. I hope so. Anxiety and phobia workbook, if anyone wants to get the sites off of this. And those of you that are in human services working with people or kids, there's some good stuff in here that you could use to, you know, as homework or stuff with others. Hi, Pam. Missed you.